much too complex, much too complex, too complex, too complex, too complex.
Good afternoon. My name is James K. Holder II. Some of you may know me as Sir James II. And I'd like to welcome you back to Not On My Watch. As always, I'd like to ask you to subscribe, like, comment, and share. I want you to retweet this and repeat this. For many weeks, I've been asking you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I really appreciate the support with that. We are very close to our goal. Right now, we're at about 850 subscribers, and the goal by the end of this week is to reach that 1,000 subscriber limit. And at that point, I'll be able to offer more within this cast, but then also I will, as promised, offer a audio-only podcast, which is something many of you have been asking for. So, tragically, over the weekend, as a nation, we witnessed the shooting death an unarmed black teenager of 15 years old, Jordan Edwards. And the details of that case are still unfolding, but as always, this cast is about the resistance, but it's also a representation of Black Lives Matter and proving that they do matter. So this episode is dedicated to you, Jordan, and I light this candle in honor of your family and all of the pain that they are going to suffer through in the days to come. So let us keep focused on that and remember that life is precious and that we must focus on justice at all times. Today's episode is kind of a little different. We have been talking about this Georgia 6th Congressional District runoff race. And one thing that a lot of people may not know is that there is currently a trial going to court tomorrow. It will be in Georgia, not even a mile from the studio. And there are multiple plaintiffs, but I was able to get a one-on-one exclusive interview with S01E15, who is the executive director of the New Georgia Project. Today I am joined with S01E15, who is the executive director of the New Georgia Project. This is one of the very exciting groups in Georgia. You've been around since what year?
Since 2014,
officially. Since 2014. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what the group does?
Okay. So actually in 2013, the New Georgia Project received a small grant to go to South Georgia and talk to Black residents in rural parts of the state. I think that when people think about rural Georgia, in a lot of people's minds, they think that it's really white. And that's not the case in Georgia. We have several majority Black counties that are completely rural. To talk to them about Medicaid expansion and to talk to them about the Affordable Care Act coming to Georgia. Nice. And so we were sitting on people's couches and sitting on people's porches and talking and realizing that not only was the Affordable Care Act not going to be affordable for people in the state of Georgia because we didn't have Medicaid expansion, but also these people were not registered to vote. And so we started to dig a little bit into the numbers and realized that there were over 1 million Black Americans and Latinos in the state of Georgia at that time who were eligible to vote and unregistered. Wow. And that's when we really found our mission, because when you start to think about sort of top of the ticket races, so governor, United States Senator, president, progressives, i.e. or Democrats, were losing by a margin of between 200,000 and 300,000 votes consistently. Right. And there were 3, 4, 5 times that number of eligible Black people who weren't even participating in the process because they were unregistered.
Okay. So I became familiar with the project just as a part of your working to register those votes specifically for the 2016 election. So could you tell me a little bit about what your goal was for the 2016 election and how you did in terms of meeting those numbers?
Well, my goal for 2016 election was to register everybody, right? And to raise enough money to register everybody. So we fell a little short of that.
Okay.
But I'm really proud with the results of our program. In 2016, we registered over 123,000
Wow.
Georgians of color. Combined with our previous efforts, it put us over the 200,000 mark.
Okay.
And so when you think about the fact that there were, 800,000 African Americans who were eligible to vote but unregistered,
Right.
we've cleared basically 25% of that since 2014.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and 2016 was a big reason that we made it happen. So we learned a lot about ourselves. We learned a lot about how to talk to people about voting and participating, particularly people of color. And hopefully the results of our work from 16 can inform campaigns and other nonprofits and civic engagement groups and leaders about how to talk to all Georgians, because we were in all 159 of Georgia's counties.
Okay, so you've been to all of the counties and you've talked to rural people and you've done the one-on-one work. Mm-hmm. What would you say, just from like an anecdotal experience, is the number one barrier to people sort of being empowered to vote and take advantage of
I think that we do a terrible job of connecting sort of the act of voting to the change that people want to see in their lives.
Okay.
I think that there aren't many places where civics education happens anymore. It certainly doesn't happen in schools. And lots of people don't know how government works. So I've talked to, and I'm going to save names to protect the guilty. But I've talked to elected officials who
put them out there, because we keep it real here.
Who don't know the difference between what city council does versus what the county commissioners do versus what the mayor does, right? And so if an office holder doesn't exactly appreciate and understand the differences in those roles, in those different government agencies, like ordinary citizens are not going to either. And so people just don't understand. So if there is a pothole, right? Like not signing a WhiteHouse.gov petition. I mean, that's an extreme example, but people really don't know where to go, who to call to fix the things that they want to see fixed. And the other thing, I think the other really big hurdle is that at least with Black people and Latinos, they don't trust elected officials. That they see them as being really motivated by self-interest, and that their primary interest is getting reelected. And so, we did a number of focus groups, and we did some polling, single gender, mixed gender, single race, mixed race. And what we learned is that, in a place like Georgia, where the minimum wage is $5.15 an hour, it's lower than the federal minimum wage, where unemployment is double that for Black Georgians and white Georgians. We still don't have Medicaid expansion. And these are people who had never voted before, but voted for Barack Obama twice, and they still have these horrible sort of challenges that they are trying to overcome in life. It's like, well, what's the point of voting? I voted for Barack Obama and my life isn't materially different. And so then you have to spend time explaining, right? Like how we push back against sort of corporate greed and the forces why Medicaid expansion is being blocked down the road at the state capitol in Atlanta, not from Congress. We have a lot of things to criticize Congress about, but on this particular issue, the culprits are around the corner, right? So again, not trusting politicians and not understanding how government works. Combined are two of the biggest hurdles. And then also just active voter suppression on the part of our government. It's not everywhere in the United States, but certainly we are actively fighting it here in Georgia.
In this next segment, we take a look at what this May 4th hearing in Atlanta has to do and the implications with the June 20th runoff featuring Jon Ossoff, the Democrat, and one of the major faces of the resistance. You mentioned briefly active voter suppression. If you could sort of sum that up in one sort of blurb, what would it be to explain to someone who didn't understand what that meant?
Long lines at the polls, voter ID laws, playing games with the dates that elections are held. We're going to court in a few days to push back against playing with the voter registration deadline.
Now, this is actually a big story and it's not getting a lot of coverage. But I read it in the Huffington Post, and I'm sure like a couple of other places promoted this story, where basically the Voting Rights Act dictates that you should have 30 days to register before an actual election or a federal election.
That's the maximum, right? So there's some states where you can go and register the same day and vote the same day. So the Voting Rights Act says that it can't be more than 30 days.
Okay.
So your voter registration deadline can't be more, but it can be less than 30 days.
It could be, okay.
Right.
And yet, within this particular race for the Georgia 6th District, Congressional District, with John Ossoff, because it's going to a runoff, the Secretary of State, who is Sean Kemp, or Kemp,
Brian
Kemp, that's what it is. Clearly.
Right. Brian Kemp.
Some Republican who's working in the Secretary of State's, the head of the Secretary of State's office, is working to limit or really restrict any new registered voters from being able to participate in that election.
Right.
So, tell me a little bit about that claim. Who are the plaintiffs, and what is the ultimate ask?
Okay. So we are plaintiffs, and we are joined by our partners and allies, the Georgia Conference of the NAACP, the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Atlanta. They're a sort of civil rights and advocacy organization representing AAPI Georgians. And we are being represented by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. So it's an impact litigation sort of law firm based out of Washington, D.C. And Pro Georgia, which is a table of progressive organizations that are doing civic engagement work. And so I'm really excited about the mix of plaintiffs. They're all organizations that have boots on the ground, that have been in the streets and have been registering voters in and around the 6th Congressional District, right, and who have members who are directly impacted by the Georgia state statute. And so what we're pushing back against is that the Georgia Constitution and Georgia law is saying that if you weren't eligible to vote in the April 18th general election, then you are not eligible to vote in the June 20th runoff election. And the way that they are enforcing that is by saying that the voter registration deadline for the April 18th election applies to the voter registration deadline for the June 20th runoff. What that means is that there's going to be a 90-day blackout period. So a 90-day window where people can't register to vote. The counties aren't processing voter registration forms, like they've essentially shut down as they prepare for the June 20th runoff. I understand that there's upwards of 15,000, maybe almost 20,000 people in one of the counties that have registered to vote since the March 20th deadline, and their voter registration forms are essentially sitting in a box in the corner. Right. And so those people, they live in the district, they want to vote. The Voting Rights Act doesn't say only for general elections or only for primary elections. It says 30 days before any election is the largest window that you can have to prevent people from voting.
And they're going for 90 days. So ultimately this is active disenfranchisement of voters in the district who have all the legal right to vote in this election, and yet their rights are being sort of withheld. And so how, just sort of for people who, again, I always try to break things down, because sometimes we talk about disenfranchisement and we talk about sort of the intersection of race and gender and politics. How does something like this play into this particular race?
Well, the thing that's really interesting and unique about the 6th Congressional District is that it used to be really white. Really white. Hella white. And now the demographics are changing, and they're changing pretty rapidly. And it's sort of reflective of the demographic changes that are happening in the state of Georgia. So 1.5 million people have moved to Georgia in the past decade.
Okay.
81% of them are people of color.
Wow.
Right? And so Georgia's demographic changes, not only are they big and massive, they're also happening really, really quickly. And they're also unique because unlike a place, for example, like Arizona, that is also going through its own demographic shift. The demographic changes that are happening in Georgia are being driven by Black people moving into the state. So political scientists are referring to it as the reversal of the Great Migration. So between the 1920s and the 1970s, Black Americans fled the South to go to Chicago, New York, Detroit for gainful employment, but also to flee sort of racialized oppression. And now they and their children are moving back to North Carolina and Atlanta because of weather, access to opportunity, great colleges, etc. 498 out of the Fortune 500 companies have presences, offices here in Atlanta. So lots of educated, upwardly mobile people of color are moving into Georgia, and it's changing the complexion. And they're all not moving to downtown Atlanta. They're all not moving to the 044, right? And so, many of them are moving into the 6th Congressional District. And again, it used to be really white, and that is not the case anymore.
But Hillary Clinton lost that by 1 point or something.
Yes,
she came
so
really close.
She came really close to winning that district. She lost that district by just under 600 votes. I know that you have more than 600 friends on Facebook.
Well, right. I mean, and that's what I'm saying. It's like people sort of scoff at these types of nitpicky details for a runoff registration deadline, but how many people did you say whose registrations were just waiting in a box?
17,000.
So, 17,000 versus a 600 margin. It's really sort of, it does come down to the hairs. It comes down to the 1, 2, 3, and it's I think that's why I always try to encourage people just to, one, get out and vote and be empowered, because everybody thinks, it doesn't really matter anyway. All these elections are determined by oftentimes very, very small margins, but they have a huge impact.
Absolutely. The outcome of this 6th Congressional District race is going to be really, really important for a number of reasons. One, it sort of demonstrates that these congressional districts in and around Metro Atlanta, although they've been gerrymandered within an inch of their life, the districts that are drawn are so ridiculous. They look like someone spit on a map, and the contours of the loogie that you carved is what the congressional district looks like. It's terrible. So the districts have been gerrymandered within an inch of their life, but they're still competitive. So that means that despite all of their attempts to consolidate power and hold on to power, the Republicans are still going to have to fight tooth and nail to maintain the sort of power and control they have of the congressional delegation. But also, it sends a message to the congressional Republicans that going along with the Trump agenda, the extremist Trump agenda, will get you primaried, will get you, and people are coming for your seat. The resistance is real, right? And yes, it's marching in the streets, it's organizing, it's advocating and lobbying, but it's also voting. Elections have consequences, and just like a lot of these people were hired, many of them are preparing to be fired. And so I think that a win for Ossoff in the 6th Congressional District sends a strong message that 2018 is going to be a problem.
So I do want to talk about both of those things.
Okay.
One, what does a win for us, for the resistance, for the progressive coalition, what does that look like at this outcome on Thursday when you go to court?
Oh, on Thursday. Okay, I was going to say, Trump impeachment?
Oh, wait. We'll get there.
Okay. On Thursday, a win looks like moving the voter registration deadline from March 20th to May 22nd.
Okay.
So that's the relief that we're asking for from the court, that we move the voter registration deadline to 30 days before the June 20th election, in alignment with the Voting Rights Act. Right?
Okay. Now let me ask you another question. What can viewers, what can ordinary citizens who aren't plaintiffs do to encourage that, or what can we do to continually bring attention to that?
We have a petition.
Okay.
So I would ask that people follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. So we're New Georgia Project, or at New. On Twitter, we're at New GA Proj, PROJ. On Facebook, we're New Georgia Project. Or go to our website, it's newgeorgiaproject.org, or they can donate, newgeorgiaproject.org/donate. But we also have a petition. We've got up to 5,000 signatures right now, and we're looking for more. And essentially, the petition is telling the Secretary of State to do his job.
Nice.
Do your job. Right? We see him as the CEO of Elections Incorporated in the state of Georgia. We think it's his responsibility to make it easier for Georgians to vote, not more difficult. So do your job.
Nice. Lastly, Ense and I discussed candidly the rampant voter suppression efforts that occur in states like Georgia and all across the country, and what you can do to prevent those efforts from taking away your voting rights. Now, I just have one last question for you, and it's speaking to a broader scale, right? So you work specifically within Georgia, and we see how these elections can be determined by things that are sort of external to voters' choice, to what the citizens actually want. So how do these types of sort of nefarious dealings with voter suppression and voter ID and the gutting of the Voting Rights Act in 2013 and all these other things that we see happen and materialize as a part of the sort of GOP strategy, how does that play out in your view in 2018, in 2020? Like, how, as America continues to brown, how effective can this go?
Right. I think that we're in for a fight. I think that we are in for a fight for sort of our democracy, the integrity of our entire political process. I don't think that people are going to ever forget that Hillary Clinton won by 3 million votes, and the popular vote by 3 million. But we still have that guy as president of the United States. 2016 was the first presidential election, the first federal election without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act.
Correct.
And while many people will blame the outcome on, Russia and FBI Director Comey and the Electoral College, I think that voter suppression had as much to do with it as any of those other things, as much to do with the outcome that we had. Right. We're talking, so there's tons of people who were turned away from the polls, people who were threatened, who were confused about their polling location and confused about their rights. And I am concerned because we're not going to stop our work, right? Like, we've stated out loud on the record that it is our aim to register all the unregistered eligible black people, to register all the unregistered eligible Latinos in the state of Georgia, and so we're going to keep doing that work. We're at we're at 210,000 now, so we are trying to bring our whole community to the Democratic table. To the table of our democracy, right? So small d democratic is what I'm referring to.
Yes.
And I'm excited about what the opportunities are, because I think that one of the most effective tools against voter suppression is large-scale voter registration and civic engagement. So you can try, to play this game at the margins, right? Where we're talking about, 598 votes, or what Clinton lost the 6th Congressional District by, and 17,000 votes are sitting, or new registration forms are sitting in a box, in one of the counties in the 6th Congressional District. But we're going to register another 100,000 black folks this year.
Nice.
So be mad, stay mad, but we're going to do this, right? And people are excited. And I also am, what we're also learning from knocking on doors and talking to people is that letting people know about the sort of attempts at disenfranchisement also has an animating effect, right? So people are like, what? They're trying to take our vote? I mean, it's not something that's sustainable, right? Like, you can't build a movement off of it, but what you can do is get people to fight and make sure that people get up and exercise the rights that they have access to. And, like, I'm an organizer, right? So I get that, you know, it's important to build power, and that the power really lies in the hands of the people, because we've never been able to compete against corporate interests and against moneyed interests. Like, I get all of that, and I still think that voting is important, right? I still think that elections have consequences, and so yes, I want you to march, I want you to protest, I want you to give money to newgeorgiaproject.org/donate today, right? But I also but I also need you to vote, right? One of the other fights that we got into in the days, weeks leading up into the election was a county in central Georgia, Macon-Bibb, where there was an attempt to move polling locations that were predominantly black inside a sheriff's station. So like people in a neighborhood that was poor and predominantly African American and had gone like 95% for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. And you know, had a history of like a fraught relationship with the police in that part of the state. They wanted to move the polling location from inside of a community center, a rec center, inside the police station. And you go into the sheriff's station, and you know you're subject. You have to show your ID. You're subject to being videotaped, right? And then it's just. It would, so we argued that it would have a chilling effect. Right. And the reply, and we got this from black people too, was like, well, if they aren't criminals, then they shouldn't have any problems.
Yeah,
like,
but if you have parking tickets or something that you could be, you know, you're now, it's forcing you to be in a sort of contentious space, right? Where
and
you should be able to freely,
people should be able to freely exercise their vote without government interference, without fear, without intimidation, right? And not to mention, and the part that I think was most frustrating was that there were 6 churches within a quarter of a mile from the community center, and there were 2 churches that offered up their location and said we will act as a polling location. You don't have to go inside the sheriff's station. Right. Fortunately for us, we have great lawyers, right? But we also have an amazing team of organizers and activists. So we petitioned the county, knocked on every door in that precinct twice. And got enough signatures to stop them from moving the polling location into the. But you know, I also could have been using those organizers to knock on people's doors to register them to vote, right? But now we have to fight this foolishness, and we have a finite amount of resources. So being strategic about how we deploy them, right, is also a strategy, I think, on their part, right? Like having us play defense regularly is another way.
And that's sort of been the approach to this. I always call it Trump's acid rain. There's so much diversion. There's like misdirection, and there's all these things that like, oh, well, we're worried about this, and we got to focus on this, and we got to focus on that. So instead of having this one laser-focused effort to resist, you're now your resources are spread thin, and now you're become vulnerable somewhere else. Right. So it is a multi-pronged attack on our voting rights. I mean, it's just.
I mean, we've heard of, you know, again, uniformed officers being in front of the polling location on election day, right? Like, why are you loitering? You're not on duty, right? Like, you're just here to be here to sort of, I don't like to threaten people. And especially in places like, again, small town Georgia, where there's, you know, maybe a sheriff's race on the ballot, and the sheriff deputies will like take turns standing in front of the polling locations. You know, it's not quite, Bubba riding around on the back of a pickup truck with a shotgun.
Well, I heard about that too.
Right.
But I mean.
Right. But so the intimidation can be much more insidious.
Right.
And we have great partners and allies. We work with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and the Advancement Project to try to do poll monitoring on Election Day. We help them, support them with the 866 Our Vote hotline. That's the election protection hotline that's normally up in the days and weeks leading up to every election, every federal election. It takes all kinds of forms. Listen, there was in Gwinnett County, a poll worker got fired they're required to provide to allow you to bring in assistance. They don't have to provide sort of language assistance to you, but they're required to allow you to bring in an interpreter if you need one, or if you're vision impaired, etc. If you're handy capable in any kind of way, you're allowed to bring in aides to help you during the voting process. And they would straight up tell our Spanish-speaking citizens, like, no, you can't bring anybody into the booth with you. And people were like, but I read somewhere, and they would just be like, no, and super hostile, like, if you can't speak English, we're not going to help you and you can't vote today.
Wow.
Right. And, fortunately, that voter was connected with, one of our partners and said, like, this doesn't feel right. Because what often happens is that people will get turned away and they'll think that it's them, right? Like, I didn't know the rules. And then they get embarrassed, right? Because when you vote in your neighborhood. So these are your neighbors who see you getting kicked out of line, or who see you getting talked down to by the poll workers, and a lot of people internalize that.
Would rather just not.
Absolutely. When we registered like almost 90,000 people in 2014, and by Election Day 14, only 40,000 or 46,000 of them had made it on the voter rolls. 40,000 of them were still missing. And a lot of them were first-time registrants, new Americans. They had just become naturalized citizens. And that was one of the most devastating days for me because, we have people who brought their entire families, right, with them to go vote. Like, I'm an American. I've worked really hard to, pass this test. I've paid this money. I've pledged allegiance to the flag. I'm going to go vote. We're going to take selfies. It's going to be awesome. And they got turned away on Election Day and were told that they weren't on the voting rolls. And so, like, do you know how hard it's going to be to get that person
to go back? Yeah. It's just, it is sustaining damage. I want to ask two things. And like, just one more thing. Just one. Because you're just such a wealth of information. I know. What is the best way to determine whether your registration is up to date? If you had to tell somebody, how do you know?
mvp.sos.ga.gov. So it's the My Voter page. So just Google My Voter page. It's the Secretary of State's website. You go in, you put in your first initial, you put in your last name, your county, and your birth date. And it'll pull up all of your voter registration information. Where you go vote early, who your representatives are, what districts you live in, the date that the last time you registered to vote, all of that. Nice. And if you don't see your name on there, then you need to register, or you need to contact your county and figure out what's going on. There are sometimes there'll be messages. So if there's like a red banner or something, I think that women, or just people who change their name, should be concerned. In Georgia, if you move across the street, you could be in a different precinct and have to re-register to vote, right? So again, in a lot of states and a lot of counties, if you're within the same county, you don't have to re-register. You can vote anywhere in the county. That is definitely not the case in Georgia, right? My voter page, mvp.sos.ga.gov. Google My Voter page. It'll tell you everything you need to know about what your registration status is as of that moment.
It's funny that you mentioned that because my across the street neighbor who our mutual friend, we were going to go carpool to the polls, and then it came to find out we didn't have the same polling location. And it's like she literally lives across one street, and we don't have the same
Listen, that gerrymandering is a real thing. Like, they will carve up a district. Like, there will be a lot. You listen. I've seen people in apartment complexes,
No.
like in the same apartment complex. So like you are, building A and Unit 1 and 1 through 5 are in one polling location and 6. It's a mess.
That is crazy.
It's a mess. Yeah.
Last question, I promise. What is so I see what you do on this scale in Georgia, but obviously this conversation is something that is national or federal rather. Is there any sort of larger umbrella organization that you could kind of refer someone to now to say, okay, well maybe this wasn't for you because you don't live in Georgia, but this is one place where you can go and find other organizations doing the type of work you do that they can contribute to or volunteer with?
I really like movement2017.org.
Okay.
So it's a website. I mean, I guess I would, if I had to say, it's like a Better Business Bureau for the resistance. And so it's organizations that have a track record of doing good work.
Okay.
And it's a map. It's an interactive map, so you can click on your state. It talks about like how your state leans, like whether or not it leans Republican or leans Democratic, whether or not it's a toss-up state. And so you get to learn about other states too. So if you are a progressive who wants to do more and you're in California, I want you to go ahead and click on that purple state. I want you to click on Georgia and look at some of the organizations that are doing work in Georgia and some of the fights that are being fought around the country to figure out like how you can help and how you can contribute. And so I like movement2017.org as a resource to figure out what the fights are in other parts of the country.
Nice. Well, again, I just appreciate you so much for opening up your office here and giving us your time to just explain your experience with this.
Anytime back. I'm trying to put you in a purple t-shirt and have you out here registering voters with us. Although you did wonderful work. You've contributed to our organization in so many ways. So I really want to thank you for being a champion and a supporter and just giving us a platform and an opportunity to talk about the work that we're doing. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It goes both ways. All right.
Go Jackets.
Awesome. And I just want to thank my friend S01E15 for joining us today on today's cast. She is a wealth of knowledge and a true, strong champion of the resistance. The future is female, the future is colored, and she is certainly a representation of that. For the years of her dedicated work within the nonprofit sector to empower American voters to exercise their voting rights. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I cannot thank you enough, Ense. And also, I would like to thank our friends of the show. This week, we are thanking Patrick T. We are thanking Catherine J. of LaGrange Park, Illinois. And also Eliza W. of Ellicott City, Maryland. And as always, if you would like to become a friend of the show, you can donate to the link above at paypal.me/JKH2. That contribution could help me buy, of $1, could help me buy a cup of coffee. It could help me buy lots of coffee if you donate more than $1. I appreciate the support in any form and in any amount. And as always, I'd like to ask you to relax, relate, and resist. Until next time, thank you.
Too complex.